Hey, guys. I got an amazing offer for you guys, but be quiet, okay? Don't tell anyone this. I started my own Bitcoin treasury company, and I'm gonna be selling you guys my stocks. Look at this. I have the stock certificate right here. If anybody wants to buy it, it is about right over here, $10 to buy my... In today's video, we're going to be diving into Michael Saylor, his company. Is he going to go bankrupt, and what is going to be the effect here on the Bitcoin price? We're going to be talking here about some specific scenarios what could force his company to be bankrupt, and then as well we're going to be diving into what the effect is going to be here on the Bitcoin price. And can Michael Saylor indeed survive all of this, or will he have to get back and work at McDonald's? That is going to be the topic here of this video. Again, it is going to be a very difficult video to make, and there's a lot of different scenarios that can play out. This is not something that is very simple. His entire company, his debt structure is so complicated. I wonder if even the man, Michael Saylor, even can foresee all of the mess that he can potentially create. Or is this company still doing extremely fine? Has he just taken on extremely much debt? Because it's all part of a much bigger, greater plan. That is all going to be the topic of this video. So anyway, let's first dive here into how his company works. How much Bitcoin does he have? How much cash does he have? How much dividend does he have to pay? Let's dive here first into the dashboard and let's analyze it before we're going to talk about the different scenarios that can potentially push him to go bankrupt. Now, if we actually go here to the dashboard, it is extremely simple. If you just go to strategy.com right over here, this is his website. Michael Saylor, his company, has made this amazing and easy to understand dashboard. Now, there are a lot of different types of statistics like implied volatility, MNAV, amplification, proof, net leverage, all these complicated things, but we're going to simplify the dashboard over here. So this is the amount of Bitcoin that he currently holds, about 845,000. You can see that he holds a lot of Bitcoin. Now, this is a total valuation. It's about $54 billion. Now, he has about $1 billion in cash reserves, and he has about $1.7 billion in annual dividends, which means he has to pay $1.7 billion each year to pay for his debt that he has taken on to buy these Bitcoin. Now, this means that he has about 31 years of coverage to pay these dividends. And the reason how he calculates that is because he has $54 billion right now in Bitcoin. So he has $54 billion in dividend. So he can use these Bitcoin reserves to pay for the dividends if his cash runs out. Again, he has $1 billion in cash, and that is enough to pay for these dividends for 7 months. So in 7 months, these cash reserves are going to run very low, and he will probably have to sell Bitcoin to pay for these dividends. That is the reason why he is selling Bitcoin. Now, there's one big problem with this, and this is MNAV. Now, what basically MNAV means is this is the amount of Bitcoin that you hold per share. Now, the way that MNAV here is calculated is a little bit different than MNAV is normally calculated. For example, if we go to strategytrackerhere.com, they say that the MNAV is about 0.88. That means that you would have been better off on actually buying Bitcoin on the spot market than buying the stock of strategy here of Michael Saylor. So the way he calculates MNAV is a little bit different than what normal companies would calculate it. So there's some nuance here, but basically what happens is that if he runs out of money, he runs out of USD reserves to pay for the dividends, he will have to sell some of the Bitcoin here to pay for this dividends. That's the reason why he sold Bitcoin. Now, the problem is when he actually does that, his MNAV goes down. When his MNAV goes down, the reason to buy his whole entire stocks kind of falls apart, because the whole reason you would buy a stock is in order to make more Bitcoin through him taking on more leverage and more debt. But if he has to sell more and more Bitcoin to pay for dividends, then MNAV would go down and his strategy would kind of break apart. This is the reason why going bankrupt would be incredibly hard unless Bitcoin dumps to a significant low level. And let's talk about these scenarios. How low would Bitcoin have to dump for the Bitcoin reserves to be so small that it would push the company to go bankrupt? All right, so he has about 7 months left. Oh, Michael Saylor, that is not a whole lot of money you have left. You have to pay 1.7 billion of dividends every single year. You took on too much leverage. Oh, that is so bad, Michael Saylor. However, Michael Saylor has a very big brain. He's not so dumb like you guys that trade money on Bybit and lose everything and get liquidated. He doesn't use a stop loss. It is not really that simple after all. He still has his Bitcoin. He can continue to sell his Bitcoin to fund his dividend payment. But what if the Bitcoin price significantly crashes? Now, in the first scenario, let's specifically talk about if this happens. What if Bitcoin crashes to $8,000 and trades there for about 2 years? Let's dive here into it, guys. So again, in scenario 1, you can expect that if the Bitcoin price crashes all the way to $8,000, what would then happen at that point in time? Well, we're going to use some AI here to make some calculations. So if Bitcoin is going to trade at $8,000 and they do not have any cash to actually pay for any more dividends, then what they would have to do is they would have to sell 40% per year of the total Bitcoin holdings, about 2.7 billion, to fulfill their debt obligations, which means that if Bitcoin crashes to $8,000, then at that point in time, it is basically done. It doesn't really matter if Bitcoin suddenly recovers a couple of years after that. If Bitcoin trades at $8,000 for more than a year, it is basically done. At that point, they would likely go and file for bankruptcy because they would have to sell so much Bitcoin that their whole entire strategy just doesn't make sense anymore. MNEF would crash, the stock would crash, and the strategy would be done at that point in time. Now, let's talk here about a third scenario. This scenario is a little bit more complex, but let's say that people lose confidence in his stock, but the Bitcoin price does go to the upside. In that case, let's say that his stock would continuously trade into a discount even during a bull run. In that case, he can sell some of his Bitcoin, but not really his stock. And he will have to sell some of his Bitcoin to still pay for those dividends. Now, in that case, he would certainly not go bankrupt. But there would be a scenario where in the next bear market, he may face some trouble. Let's dive into this specific scenario as well. So in this specific scenario, again, we would see that the Bitcoin price continues to trend here to the upside. And so we would just have a normal bull run like we have always had. But what would particularly happen in this bull run is that, for example, the bear market before that, Michael Saylor would have to sell so much Bitcoin to pay for its dividends because it took on too much leverage. And a lot of people lose trust in his company. His MNEF is going to go down. So he can't really sell any stock here because his MNEF is constantly trading into discounts. At that point in time, he would have to constantly tap in his Bitcoin reserve. And even though Bitcoin would be in a bull run, he would not be able to buy more. He would have to constantly sell Bitcoin. He would be fine in selling Bitcoin. Maybe it wouldn't suppress the price that much. But if the Bitcoin price would then have a collapse again to the downside, so let's say we go up, but nobody really wants to buy his stock anymore. People just think it's too risky. And then during the whole entire bull run, he still has to sell Bitcoin because he has to pay for these dividends. Again, he can't really raise any more money because people have somehow lost trust in his company. Then when the bear market does hit and it goes back to the downside, let's say 50K, you get the same thing. The MNAV would trade in such a significant discount that at that point in time his reserves would be constantly depleted and his strategy itself would also fail, because at that point in time, if there's no trust anymore, then if there's no trust during the bull run, then certainly during the bear market they will have to sell so much of their Bitcoin to fund their strategy. This is the more complex type of scenario, but this is the type of scenario where you can see that if there's just really no trust anymore in his company, then regardless if Bitcoin performs well, eventually this as well could result into a bankruptcy once the next Bitcoin bear cycle actually hits. So with all these scenarios, it is still extremely unlikely that I think he will go bankrupt. But let's say hypothetically, let's say in January next year, Michael Saylor indeed is going to go bankrupt. What is going to happen then to the Bitcoin price? Let's dive into that and let's really see, is he going to destroy Bitcoin at that point? Will Bitcoin crash to 3K, or would it be a lot less horrible than people are expecting? Let's say, just for the sake of argument, the Bitcoin crashes to 30K. It would stay there until January of next year. And let's say on January of next year, Michael Saylor would go bankrupt. Again, it wouldn't really make any sense. They still have enough USD reserves. They still have enough Bitcoin reserves. Very unlikely. But let's say that they would. Now, what would we particularly see here on the Bitcoin price? Well, we have one example that we can potentially take here, and that is the FTX crash. So the FTX crash was kind of similar to what you would expect in a MicroStrategy crash, but it was a lot more smaller scale. So at that point in time, they had about $10 billion in assets that they were going to sell it into the market. But what you saw here was that the Bitcoin price immediately crashed here to the downside, but then eventually here it recovered back to the upside relatively quickly. A lot of people were really worried about this, so you got a flash crash, sideways action, and then a pump here to the upside. So this whole sideways action took here approximately 2 months to completely play out. But I say Michael Saylor, his company is a little bit bigger, so you would probably expect that this 2 months would turn into something like 6 to 12 months. Now, another thing that we have to understand here, and this is something that a lot of people don't really understand. If Michael Saylor is going to go bankrupt, they will have to sell a lot of the Bitcoin that they have to pay for a lot of the dividends, and a lot of the investors, they have to pay a lot of them out. But a lot of these investors and people that have given him money, they generally trust Bitcoin, and they're generally, Bitcoin maximalists, for example, or people bullish about Bitcoin. So even if he goes bankrupt, a lot of these Bitcoin would be sold. A lot of the people that would receive money from those sales would likely go back into the market and buy back Bitcoin with the money that they just received from the sales of Michael Saylor. So a lot of the money that would happen during a bankruptcy would eventually flow back here into the market. That is something that a lot of people are not really expecting. A lot of people are not really talking about that, but that is the most likely scenario. So what would then eventually happen is, I've made an animation here for you guys. So what would happen at first is, what you can see here is that the price would have a flash crash, just like the FTX crash. You'd probably see about 6 months here of sideways action. So again, if Michael Saylor goes bankrupt around $30,000, likely crashes 50%, and it would likely stay there for multiple months. But then after that, after those 6 months, you'll probably see a slight recovery. You probably see that ETF and institutions and corporate treasuries and ETF inflows and everything starts buying up Bitcoin. Maybe countries start buying Bitcoin, and eventually this thing will start ramping up. Again, the US deficit will continue to grow, and debt will continue to grow, money printing will continue. So eventually you will see Bitcoin recover. Now, after that, what you would probably see is, from that point onwards, is that after about 1 year, you'll likely see that Bitcoin just continues where it has always been, and just continues with its bull run and continues its cycle, and then eventually hit higher levels. A lot of the money from the bankruptcy will probably flow back into the Bitcoin price, and then you will see that the cycle continues. So overall, what I would probably expect if Michael Saylor goes bankrupt is not a crash to $3,000. It's all a little bit ridiculous. It could happen maybe during a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, but Chapter 11, it's more likely that a slow sale, a slow bleed into the market, and all of the money eventually going back here into Bitcoin. You probably see about 6 months of high FUD and the price halving in valuation, but I think after 6 months, the price would probably recover slowly after that. And about a year after that, it would likely just continue like it has always been. So, but even in that situation, it is again very unlikely that his company would go bankrupt with all those things taken into account. So overall, we make a lot of fun of Michael Saylor and in total the memes, but he is not a complete degenerate. He does have a strategy, and so far he still has Bitcoin, even though that the Bitcoin price is down. He may still be able to sell some of his Bitcoin. I think the problem with him is that he's just simply taken on too much leverage. But he is a businessman. I don't think he's a Bitcoin maximalist. I think he is a smart businessman. I think he saw a lot of opportunity, but I think he went too far. It's certainly not a scam, certainly not a Ponzi scheme. It is all going to be fine, in my opinion. And even if something does happen, I think Bitcoin will survive. I will survive, and you will survive, unless you bought his stock. That would be pretty bad. But regardless of that, I think everything is going to be fine. And if you enjoyed this video and you learned something from it, then make sure to like and subscribe. And if you would like to buy some stocks into my company, here's the stock certificate, then press the like button, and I will give away 10 stock certificates to the person who likes this video. I don't know. Anyway, I'll see you guys here in my next video. Bye-bye.